Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending the CU R&D Research and Diversity second event. For those who are new, R&D, or Research and Diversity, is dedicated to building a community for underrepresented minorities in STEM. And by speaking with experienced researchers about their accomplishments, we hope to inspire STEM students beginning their research careers and highlight potential role models for them. And just as a heads up, we'll be recording this interview to post on our website right after, and any questions can be typed into the chat, and we will get to them later on during the interview. My name is Shamar, and I'm from Brooklyn. I'm a senior in C studying biomedical engineering, also known as BME, and I'm also a co-founder and the head of technology and design.
My name is Erica. I'm originally from North Bergen, New Jersey, and I'm a junior at General Studies studying biology. I'm a co-founder of R&D and the head of development.
And I'm Vivian. I'm from Health Kitchen. I'm a sophomore studying biophysics and on a pre-med track. And I'm also a co-founder and the head of outreach of R&D. And today we have with us Dr. Carl Hart, who is the Ziff Professor of Psychology in the Departments of Psychology and Psychiatry at Columbia University. Professor Hart has published extensively in the areas of neuropsychopharmacology and drug policy. He is an award-winning author. His most recent book is entitled Drug Use for Grown-Ups, Chasing Liberty in the Land of Fear. He's lectured around the world and has appeared on multiple national television and radio shows, as well as podcasts. In 2016, the city of Miami issued a proclamation declaring February 1st Dr. Carl Hart Day.
We will be talking about some potentially sensitive topics, specifically drug use and violence associated with it. The paper that we'll be discussing is one that personally I hope everyone has had the chance to read beforehand. Titled Exaggerating Harmful Drug Effects on the Brain is Killing Black People, it touches upon many things from Dr. Hart's personal reflections on the video of George Floyd's death to how fears about certain drugs are perpetuated by the media, by law enforcement, and perhaps most significantly by researchers. We will also be asking some questions based on information from one of his books, High Price, a neuroscientist's journey of self-discovery that challenges everything you know about drugs and society. Dr. Hart, would you mind telling us about the paper a little bit more, giving us a brief background of your research?
Sure, I just want to say a word about sensitive topics related. We're going to be touching on sensitive topics, drug use and violence associated with. That's not a good framing. You know, that's part of what's going on in the United States. We frame things in that way. Drug use, let's be clear. People use drugs to have a good time, and the vast majority of people who do have a good time. And that's not to encourage any of you all to do that, but it's just so that you understand that we have accepted this language that already bias our sort of conversation about these things. And I want to make sure that we don't do that here today. And I want to make sure that we are careful in our language and how we think of these things. And we think of these things just like we do any other academic topic. Everything's open for interrogation, right? That's how we're starting. All right, so let's talk about the paper. The paper was inspired, you see the video, what happened with George Floyd. Any human could watch that video and not be horrified. And so me personally, I wonder, like, okay, what would my children think of me if I don't do something or say something about these kind of things? How will I be judged by future generations, particularly when my skill set is being used to harm people? When I say that, you saw the police officers who were making sure the crowd didn't interfere, and they were saying things about drugs, saying things like, see kids, stay off drugs, and almost jokingly about my subject matter. And so I would have been remiss not to do something not to write something, not to say something. And so that motivated me to write the piece. And then I wanted the piece to be written or published in a scientific journal, one of the better journals, so more people would read it, so that I could call out other scientists who study drugs like me, because there are a number of us, and they have been virtually silent as these injustices have happened throughout our country. I mean, like George Floyd was just one. I mean, we can go back to Breonna Taylor, go back to Laquan McDonald, who was shot in Chicago 16 times, and they tried to use PCP as an excuse. We could think about Trayvon Martin, when George Zimmerman said he looked like he was on something. We could think about here in New York, in the Bronx, where Molly Graham, they chased this poor kid, 17-year-old kid, into his grandmother's bathroom and shot him dead because they said he might have been selling weed on the corner. Who cares? That's not, you don't kill someone for that. So those kind of things have been going on in our country, and people like me who give drugs to research participants nearly every day before COVID hit, and studied the effects of these drugs, thanks to the taxpayers' dollars of the United States. And we know that drugs don't do all those things that these police have been saying, and we've been silent. And that is abhorrent, and that's irresponsible, and that's cowardly, and that's callous. And so you can see that it angered me, and it still angers me that so many of my colleagues have remained silent. And so does that help to provide a motivation for writing that paper?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to switch a little bit to your research in general. As you mentioned in the paper, like you cited multiple things of how you revealing the actual truth of what drugs do to the body. So could you talk more about that?
Well, when you say the actual truth of what drugs do to the body, that's a big ass question. I mean, it depends. It's like saying, what does sugar do to the body? Like on the one hand, sugar can provide fuel and do all these great things. And then on the other hand, it could also cause some problems. Same is true with drugs. So if we want to talk about a specific drug, I'm happy to do that. Let's talk about amphetamines. You all are college students, and you might have some experience with Adderall or something of that nature, right? So let's talk about amphetamines. Amphetamines, it is prescribed to treat attention deficit disorder, and it's also prescribed to treat narcolepsy. Methamphetamine is prescribed to treat attention deficit disorder, and it's also prescribed to treat obesity. Now, these amphetamines are excellent in those capacities. It helps people with ADHD. It can even help people lose weight short term. It helps people who have narcolepsy. That's great. And it also can increase euphoria. Some people use amphetamines as adjunct treatments for treating people who have depression. And depression is a difficult thing to treat. Under traditional antidepressant medications, they take 10 days, 2 weeks before they work. But if you add an amphetamine on board, you may get an effect a lot sooner. So they can be really helpful in those regards. Or they can also be helpful to give if you all ever gone to concerts or you've seen performances, people are on stimulants oftentimes, a lot of the artists, because they have to travel from city to city, baseball players they're on amphetamines. A number of them are on amphetamines because they have to perform. Excellent in that regard, but it can also be problematic when you have to get amphetamines through illicit sources. You may put yourself in harm's way in order to get the amphetamines. You may have problems with law enforcement. Or you might use too much on too many consecutive days and not sleep. And if you don't sleep, sleep is one of the most important sort of biological functions. If you don't sleep, of course, you can have all kinds of problems like psychiatric problems, and also amphetamines also knock out appetite in some people. And if you're not eating and sleeping poorly, that's a bad combination. You could have some real problems. So that's an example of like what drugs do and don't do. We can think about all drugs from that perspective, from heroin to cocaine. You know, you have beneficial effects, but you can also have harmful or negative effects. It all depends on a number of these factors. And it also depends primarily on education, what you know about these things and how to harness the beneficial effects while minimizing the potential negative effects.
In the paper, you said that you went into research hoping to solve the quote-unquote drug problem, much aligned with the National Institute of Drug Abuse's view on drugs. But with research that you learned, it wasn't necessarily the case. How does your research contradict what their general stance on drugs?
Okay, now we're having a conversation. Now we're into it. Okay, so now the National Institute on Drug Abuse, please understand, it's a part of the National Institutes of Health. And they fund to the tune of about $1 billion research in this area. And they have funded my research for years. In fact, they helped me getting funding from them, taxpayers funding from them, helped me to get tenure. So it's been a great thing on the one hand. On the other hand, the mission statement for the National Institute on Drug Abuse, until I believe last year or very recently, the mission statement was something like bring to bear the science to work on this problem of drug abuse and drug addiction. Now, that mission statement narrows the focus of our institute that funds all the work on these drugs. It narrows the focus into looking at almost exclusively negative effects. The vast majority of effects of these drugs are positive. Now that's quantifiable, that's not my opinion. That's even when we bring people into the lab and we see these sorts of things. But what you see on your news is negative because in movies, because what makes the news, what sells is sexy negative things. Like you don't watch a movie about heroin and the woman who's using heroin, she uses heroin a couple evenings or whatever. And then she goes to work the next day. She handles her responsibility. She's a good person. You don't see a movie like that about heroin. But that's the typical heroin user. But you don't see that. And so when you focus almost exclusively on the negative effects of drugs, as the scientific institution, you give people, your population, the world, because we fund 90% of the world's research in this area. You give the impression that the only effect of these drugs are negative. And so we have done that for many years. And I got into studying drugs because I thought that drugs had destroyed my community. I thought like, oh, the problems that I see in my resource poor community were because of people being hooked on crack or because of drug addiction, because of all of these sorts of things related to drugs. But after studying drugs for 20 something years and learning how to think, I realized that it wasn't the drugs, it's all these other things that we already know. Lack of education, poor healthcare, all the things that coronavirus is showing us as the problem. The same thing happened with drugs. Exactly the same thing. But the National Institute on Drug Abuse is so invested in showing these harmful effects because that's how they get their budget increased through Congress by saying that somebody they know died of a drug overdose, and which is a horrible thing, obviously. So I don't want to say that's not a bad thing, but the way we go about it increase the likelihood of those things happening rather than decreasing the likelihood of those things happening. And so I realized that, and I, again, had to speak out and then continued to speak out. And it's not a very popular position, but I don't particularly care because my heroes, Fannie Lou Hamer, she wasn't very popular. Malcolm X, he wasn't very popular. I have no desire to be popular. That doesn't really matter. I do have a desire to have some integrity. And the evidence tells me that we have exaggerated the harmful effects of drugs. And we do so largely because of funding. That's the fact. And if people, I can show people, it's quantifiable. I'm happy to show people this sort of thing.
So you mentioned how, you're not afraid to be unpopular. So what types of, like, I don't know if retaliation is the right word, but like backlash have you experienced from like a general scientific community regarding?
I don't, I may not win certain awards. I may not be invited for certain committees. My name may be besmirched in some circles. Those kind of things. I know I've heard these kinds of things, and that's cool. I'm a brother in the academy, and that means that I'm rare anyway. So I'm kind of accustomed to not having many friends. So that's cool.
I kind of want to switch to ask questions about your book because I got a copy and I would like to ask you some questions about it. First off, it was a great read, and it's right to categorize this as an autobiography, right?
I guess, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna contextualize some questions just for the audience at the beginning. But first, I want to know what motivated you to write this book.
What motivated me to write the book was I wanted my children to know who I am and like where I came from. And then I also wanted to inspire people who look like me to do science and I wanted people to know that you didn't have to be perfect in order to be successful. So I made a lot of mistakes, as you know, in the book. And I continue to make mistakes, and that's like human. Unlike the current occupant of the White House, who never makes a mistake or never admits to making a mistake, it's actually a strength to say, hey, I screwed up. So therefore, I need to change courses. And so I wanted people to know that, I made mistakes, but that does not mean that you can't make a contribution to your country. And you shouldn't try to do so. That was one of the reasons that was another reason that I wrote the book. Yeah.
You mentioned at the end as well, like when you get into, you know, the full title says that you're challenging like what society knows about drugs. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me was when you were describing like the different stereotypes between people who use powder cocaine versus crack cocaine, and how that's like, I don't know, I feel like it's very common and so strong even now. I know that you wrote this book a while. So like, could you elaborate more on how these mental images are formed and how they're pushed by like the media and the scientific research community?
So the first time that crack cocaine was written about in the popular press was December 1984, and it was in the LA Times. That was the first time it appeared, and people hadn't really heard of this thing called crack. The New York Times wouldn't write about it for another year. And at the time, it was this thing that was kind of localized to a few people. It was a way to smoke cocaine without losing your product. So cocaine, you have cocaine base along with the hydrochloride salt. In order to smoke it, you have to remove the hydrochloride salt, otherwise the base decomposes because the temperatures required to heat up the salt is so, the hydrochloride portion is so high, the base decomposes, so you get nothing. Some people figured out that you can remove the hydrochloride portion with something like ether, but ether is so inflammatory that that's called freebasing, and people, they didn't really want to use it because it became dangerous. That's how Richard Pryor, some of you all might recall, Richard Pryor burnt himself. He was freebasing. Crack was this simple way of removing the hydrochloride portion by simply adding baking soda, mixing it up with water and the cocaine, and then heating it up and then drying it out, and then the hydrochloride portion is gone. Now you have these little pieces of rock, and that's just the cocaine base. And now you can smoke it, and you can get the vaporizer from it. And so when it became more available in our major cities, people became concerned that there's this new, more dangerous form of cocaine. And so the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, was instructed to do a study to find out the extent to how much it's been used. And the first study that they did, they said it's really localized to a few major cities. It's not a big deal. And then this is about 1986. Len Bias dies. Len Bias was a basketball player from the University of Maryland. He was the second overall pick in the NBA draft in 1986. He was scheduled to go play for the Boston Celtics. The night that he was drafted, he went out, celebrated, and he died. Now, people originally said that he had smoked crack cocaine. Later we found out it wasn't, but originally they thought it was crack. A week after he died, the cornerback for the Cleveland Browns, Don Rogers, died from a cocaine-related death. And initially it was said that he died from crack cocaine. It wasn't, he had taken powder. But it didn't matter. At this point, the country was convinced that crack cocaine was so powerfully addictive and unpredictable that it killed both of these young athletes at the height of their athletic peaks. And so people from the Black community, larger community around the country, everyone was concerned about crack. So Congress did, the only thing Congress really can do is pass laws. Well, now they can tweet, and that's what they do now. They are on Twitter. But they passed the law that punished crack cocaine violations 100 times more harshly than powder cocaine violations, meaning that people caught with small amounts of crack were required to go to jail for a mandatory minimum period of 5 years in prison, whereas you need 100 times more powder cocaine to trigger the same sentence. And so that's where we got the 100-to-1 ratio. And then in October 1986, Ronald Reagan, the president, declared that month Crack Cocaine Awareness Month. The country was really concerned about crack, even though we would slowly learn that crack was essentially the same drug as powder, because the hydrochloride portion doesn't contribute to the pharmacology. It's only the base. Bottom line is that they're the same drug. But it would take nearly what? It would take almost 25 years before the law was changed. The law was changed in 2010. Barack Obama signed into law, signed a law that decreased the disparity from 100-to-1 to 18-to-1. Still treated crack cocaine more harshly than powder cocaine, but the disparity was decreased. But it's important to make clear here that there should be no disparity in the way that crack and powder are treated. They are the same drug. Does that help the crack story? Or did I go into too much detail? Because there's a lot of interesting stories about that old crack thing.
I remember reading it in your book. I wrote this down, and you quoted Malcolm X of saying, "Pulling the knife out 6 inches is not the same as healing the wound." And I had a question when I read that. Was I feel like there's an element of fear involved as young scientists of color or from underrepresented backgrounds. We have to do everything right, otherwise we're gonna get kicked out. We can't make noise. So how do you suggest that young future scientists, how can we push society or laws or the media towards healing without jeopardizing it or diminishing the work, making it palatable for white people, so that, accepting less than we deserve?
Well, in science, the currency is papers and funding. That's the currency. So you have to really be good at your science. That's number one. And you really have to publish. Now, I knew, so the summer of 2020, we're in the summer of 2020. We all saw what happened to George Floyd. We see all the protests. We see what's happening with the police, and we see all of these sorts of things. That was happening when I was a college student too, and I was equally upset. But I really couldn't do anything because I didn't have any skills. And so I had to shut up, be in the lab, study, work hard, publish papers, and just try to learn my craft as well as I can, better than anybody else. So when I spoke, it actually meant something. So that meant that, I was in graduate school from the age of about 25 to, 28, 29, shutting up, and there were all kinds of injustices going on related to drugs for many years even after that. But I was learning my craft, honing my skills, so when I spoke, I actually knew what I was talking about. And so I would suggest to you all to do the same thing. Learn your craft really well, and then use your skills to bring about more justice for everyone. That's what we're supposed to do.
Thank you. There are two questions so far from the audience. From Ellie, she asks, can you describe, for different types of recreational drugs, the chances of and threshold for determining whether someone has developed a drug use disorder? And of those who develop a drug use disorder, how many die from drug overdose? The numbers may also help shed light on the cost versus benefit of negative versus positive drug effects.
That's a big question. You know, Patrick Doyle is on, and Patrick had raised an issue, I think yesterday on Twitter, about this issue about, well, in our Bible, the DSM-5, we call it, it lists all of the mental disorders. And when we think about drug addiction, it's called substance use disorder. And so when you look at substance use disorder, there are 11 symptoms, and you have to endorse a certain number of symptoms before you can meet criteria for a substance use disorder. And you can meet criteria for a mild disorder, a moderate disorder, or severe. Now, when you look at these symptoms, there are some problems with the symptoms, because some of the symptoms have a lot to do with the simple fact that these drugs are illegal. And, you know, so if you say, like, one of the symptoms is you spend a great deal of time procuring the substance and so forth. If you can just go to the store and buy this, then that wouldn't be a symptom that you would meet, you know. Another symptom is tolerance, for example. If any of you all are on medications for whatever reason, you will develop tolerance if you've been taking a medication for a period of time, and tolerance actually is protective, but that's one of the symptoms. So there are some problems with the symptoms. I just want to have that as a background so people understand. I recognize that there are problems with those symptoms, and that's a paper that needs to be written about, like, why this is a problem. But I will go with the question. I will answer the question as if there are no problems with this. Okay. Well, that's so when she says, the question says, what are the chances of one meeting criteria for a substance use disorder? That varies. It depends on age. It depends on gender, all of these kinds of things. It depends on psychosocial, economic status. For example, if you have, I don't know, a job that you really enjoy and a life that you're really happy with, and you can use heroin and these sorts of things and not develop a disorder because you know how to exercise inhibitory control, you are a developed person, you have all these things in your sort of personhood developed, decreases the likelihood that you become dependent. Whereas if you are less mature, not as well developed in terms of inhibitory control, you might, there might be a higher chance that you might meet criteria for use disorder. Also, there might be a chance that you are less likely to meet your other obligations. So it depends on who the person is, their status in life, their privilege in life, all of these sorts of things. So one of the things I did in writing this latest book was I traveled around the world. And then, so I wrote, like, for example, about cocaine in Colombia and in Brazil. And so I wanted to write in cocaine places. And so I could, like, get a feel. And one of the things that happened during the courses of this travel around the globe is that I discovered that a lot of captains of industry, people in government, various governments and so forth, are fond of their psychoactive substances. And they are fine. And they run countries, they do all of these sorts of things. But that's not our typical drug using, that's not the stereotypical person who we think of as a drug user. But that's the typical drug user, especially when we think about the illicit drug trade being a multi-billion-dollar industry. Poor people alone cannot support a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so when we think about who's likely to become addicted to a substance, the same people who are likely to suffer a lot of the other sort of health problems related to poverty and deprivation and all the rest of those things. So what that tells me is that if we fix our society, we will decrease the likelihood of people meeting criteria for substance use disorder. So if we take care of our people with their basic sort of needs, meeting their basic needs, we will also decrease the likelihood that people will overindulge in substances.
Thank you. And then the next one that I'll ask for now is, what is from Lauren, and she says, what can we as academics do to assist mask decriminalization policies?
What can we do as academics? Wow. So I like to make fun of academics. I'm an academic, so I can make fun of myself. I like to make fun of us in that one of the things we like to do is like, we talk about a subject and then we think we did something about it. Or we write something, then we think we did something about it. Usually it's talk about it. And then I don't really, I'm not encouraging academics to push for decriminalization. I'm encouraging academics to push for drug regulation, like drug legal regulation. That means treating drugs just like we treat alcohol. If you're an academic, then you should know something about the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence says that we as American citizens have these birthrights, 3 of which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Some people take drugs in their pursuit of happiness, and the Declaration of Independence guarantees us that. And so when people are talking about decriminalization, they've already missed the mark. We should be trying to live up to the ideals of the nation, the ideals on which the nation was founded. And so how do we do that? That's the question. And why have drugs become illegal is a better question. And the reason why drugs have become illegal is the same reason that we have the police killing of these Black folks, racism. That's why drugs became illegal in the first place in this country. If you go back and you look at the history, not because of pharmacology, not because of these kinds of things. So it would be helpful if academics encouraged the country to live up to his ideals. That would be far more important. Make sure that people have liberty. You know, we're all guaranteed liberty so long as we don't impact the liberty of others, so long as we don't prevent others from enjoying their birthrights. That's what academics should be doing. And this is, again, because when you talk like I talk, people say, oh, he's encouraging folks to use drugs. That's not this. I'm encouraging you something far bigger than drugs. I'm encouraging you to pursue liberty and to fight for other people's liberty. That's a lot bigger than drugs.
Do you think academic institutions, like universities, have made any significant changes or improvements when it comes to anti-racism work?
What college, what university do you go to? Okay, we're at Columbia, yeah?
Yeah.
Columbia used to be in Harlem. They changed the name, right? It's still in Harlem, by the way, but they changed the name. Like Harlem, that's Black New York, right? 4% of our faculty members are Black. So when you look around your campus and then you look around the Harlem community, it's clear, come on, this is, we haven't been serious about this. In 1979, there were absolutely no women students at Columbia. Today, students make up about 50%. You don't see that kind of change happening with Black folks. You know, in that period, that 40-year period or so, we have 50% women. And that's not the case with Black students or faculty or, you know, so no, it's, well, let me share a story with you all. When you ask that question, because this is near and dear to my heart, actually. Back in 2019, it was April 2019, you guys might have heard about Alexander McNabb. You guys heard of that student, that poor guy? He was roughed up by the security guards at Barnard College. It's on videotape. It was a horrible incident. I wrote to the president of Barnard, who is a psychologist, who I had to write a letter on her behalf when she was hired here as the chair. I was the chair of psychology, wrote a letter on her behalf. And so I wrote to her about the incident that happened with Alexander McNabb, expressing my concern as the chair of psychology, as a Black father whose son was considering coming here at that time. And then just as a Black faculty member concerned about our Black students and interactions with the security guards. She didn't even pay me the courtesy to write back, to say anything about this letter or whatever happened with the student or what they did. So when we think about, when I think about like the statements that Barnard College had released recently in response to George Floyd and these sorts of things, they ring insincere and they are frustrating. Do you feel me?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
How do you think that students and faculty potentially could put pressure on these institutions?
I think one way you guys can put pressure on these institutions is you guys are the lifeline of these institutions. The students are. You are the lifeline. And you don't need to reinvent the wheel. In the 1960s and the 1970s, students all around the country staged all kinds of protests. But one of the things that they did was that when there was for example, Cornell, well, Kent State, that's a great example. One of the things that happened at Kent State was that the local community did not rent to the Black students. So the white students joined the Black students and did a walkout of the university. They all said, we're leaving together. They all joined in together and they exercised their power. And you all can do the same sort of things, but you have to do it together as students because you are the lifeline. You all still there?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Can I voice an objection to something that you said?
Please.
So you said, you know, all of a sudden there were women students at Columbia, but let me just point out there weren't very many women faculty and still aren't in many departments. So I think what happened then was that the academic quality of the undergraduate group, which was entirely male, and I went to Barnard, Columbia didn't take women, was going down because we didn't have any women students and guys didn't want to go to school with no women students anymore. So the university decided, and it was a good decision, that Columbia College would admit women. But let me point out, it was one of the last schools in the Ivy League to do that. And so it was able to do that practically overnight. But what didn't happen was hiring more women faculty, promoting more women faculty, and paying women faculty appropriately. So turning on a dime when it comes to faculty and who, you know, cost the university, and turning on a dime when it comes to undergraduates, many of whom pay full tuition, are different entities, and the university has its financial interests very much in the forefront, and particularly now with coronavirus.
So I don't think that was an objection. I think so let's just be clear. The number of Black students, we still have nowhere near the number of Black students that we should have at Columbia. And we do have half women. So we have been remiss in terms of getting Black students. So that's one. And then when we think about like women faculty, yeah, some departments are better than others. And for example, like in psychology, we have more women faculty than we do male. So it depends on the department. But across the board, in terms of faculty, we're nowhere near Black faculty where we should be.
Well, I agree. I mean, the representation of people of color in our faculty is, you know, pathetic, absolutely pathetic. And women are better, but the university still does not in any way, shape, or form, and people of color is more egregious than anything, and in any way, shape, or form conform to the talent that's available in the country as a whole and to the kinds of people that are available in the country as a whole, which is, you know, annoying. I mean, I was the first tenured woman in my department. My department still has no people of, well, depending on your definition, but still, although it's more diverse now than it was when I came in, still, Black faculty members in the sciences are rare as hen's teeth, really, especially.
Yeah, you know, Darcy, I don't want to really get into like, I don't want people to think like it's about just sort of cosmetics. Because one of the things that I want to make clear, the kind of Black people that we bring in these spaces are not the ones who are going to be out here advocating for justice for folks who are getting their asses kicked. So I want to make sure that we understand that no matter who we bring in here, that we are fighting for those who are being shut out. And then we're not just bringing in people to say we have diversity for the sake of diversity. So I want the students to be clear about that. You all do get that, right? You understand the difference. Like we can have, for example, tokens. That's what I talked about in my piece. We have to make sure we are careful about not just hiring tokens, because we're really good at that. We select for those people.
I don't know. I think a lot of us, like, we see that as like performative allyship, or like it's like how companies and corporations came out with all these statements, but it's like they didn't change anything about their behavior. They just want to look like they're doing the work or take credit for actual Black students doing the work. I guess I'm gonna try and lead the conversation into a more general question about mentorship, about in college and beyond, personal, academic. I guess any advice for undergrads who want mentors, and also about grad school, because you mentioned how, like, you know, we have to know everything. Our science needs to be perfect. So would you say grad school is like a necessity?
Yeah, in terms of mentorship, you really want to have somebody who cares about you as a person. Just you, they want to see you succeed. And you want somebody who's going to be there and they have time to be there for you, because many people are busy. And frankly, I don't really want to be mentoring anyone who doesn't share my politics. For example, I would have a really difficult time having a student who is a major supporter of Trump. You know, that ain't gonna work. You know, that's a fact. So you have to make sure that the person with whom you are with really supports you and understand you and want to see you succeed. You know, for me, it's really about people who want to change the world to make it a better place for those folks who have been shut out. And so you want to make sure your mentor worldview also is consistent with yours. That's important for me. But if you just want to put your head down and not care about what's happening in the world, well, you should probably ask somebody else about mentorship. But that's not, for me, I'm a global citizen. And I worry about all these people who are being harmed as a result of our horrible president and policies and all of these things.
And then I'm just gonna ask real quick, in terms of, just to check back about graduate school, like, I think for some, I think especially for like the engineers, like getting a bachelor's, I think there's just a lot of questions. Our group also focuses on like first-gen low-income students. So like personally, like I don't know anything about it. So would you say it's a necessity, or how can you like get the best experience from grad school, or what the skills that you need to succeed?
So grad school, I was lucky in terms of grad school. I had a great experience. I went to the University of Wyoming. Wyoming, I think it's the whitest state in the union, along with Vermont. And so people were like, damn, why are you going to Wyoming? I went to Wyoming because there was a guy, Charlie Kassir, who would give me all of his time and work with me in the lab, like one-on-one, and I learned all of these skills, and I was able to do things like, for example, Wyoming is a state, at the time, they had less than 500,000 people, and it's the 9th largest state in the United States. I mean, I had like dinner with the governor, Secretary of State, all of those people, because it was a small state. They knew everyone. And so I got an opportunity to learn about politics, about all of these kind of things while I was a graduate student. It was just a nurturing environment. And that's what I needed, because I had so many academic deficiencies. Other people may not need that sort of close mentorship as I needed. And so it depends on what you need. Like, I would not have survived here at Columbia in the Department of Psychology as a graduate student because we just don't provide that kind of nurturing in our department for graduate students that happened at the University of Wyoming.
Thank you. I think we're gonna switch to audience-based questions now.
Mm-hmm. I think that Mitch had a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Hey, how's it going? I caught wind of your TED Talk when I was in a psychosocial rehabilitation program for psychosis. And it was really helpful to understand it, because part of the reason I was hospitalized was people believed that marijuana was a part of the psychosis itself. And seeing the type of advocacy that you do, and seeing kind of where we're at in the criminal justice system, I'm kind of left like, we know on the one hand that things are out of line and they're kind of getting insane. And on the other hand, you're seeing a burgeoning role for something, and I'm just using this lightly because I don't want to get caught on semantics, but I say a psychiatric officer. And I'm trying to understand from your perspective, is that someone, let me back up. I personally believe that early intervention for mental illness can be the difference between like recurrent psychosis throughout your whole life, or like readmission to mental institutions, or having a fighting chance of psychosocial rehabilitation. And from your experience, you know, where does that lie in terms of responsibility? Is that going to be a subset of policing? Is it going to be social work, or is it going to be an intersection? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Mitch, can you just say your question again more concisely, please? I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand it.
So I started with my background.
Yeah.
Now, there's so many people who get arrested for substance use who could use mental health treatment, right? They're behaving off of a psychotic episode.
Yes.
So people, I believe, are unfairly incarcerated because of punitive drug laws.
Yes.
So if you were to have someone being able to assess and triage the psychiatric component, is that a social work thing, or is that a policing role? I mean, I don't think people even understand where to start.
No, I understand. Thank you. First of all, I think policing should just be taken out of drugs, period. That they shouldn't be involved in drugs at all. You know, I am even annoyed oftentimes about the medical community, because there's so much ignorance in the medical community about drugs. And so I think that people who are real drug experts should be dealing with the issue that you raise. This should not be a police issue, in no way. This is where I am. It goes back to this issue of the founding ideals of the country. This life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. People should be allowed to alter their consciousness however they choose. And when there are problems, we should have people who are skilled to help them deal with it. And we should do a better job of educating people how to decrease the likelihood of the problems. And then when problems occur, how to ameliorate the problems. So this is not a policing issue. If you want to screw a problem up, give it to the police.
Thanks for answering that. I mean, just for the record, I see my situation is like a drug allergy. And I'm interested to hear the type of advocacy that you do, because I think it helps people understand that not everyone can use them, but most people can, right? So thanks for answering my question.
Thank you for asking.
The next question, I guess, we got from the chat. We got it from Patrick Doyle.
Oh, do you want me to talk?
Oh yeah, you have the chance now.
Yeah, thank you, I appreciate it. I gotta scroll down and find my question because I crafted it. Dr. Carl Hart, so nice to talk with you directly.
Good to see you, Patrick, man.
I'm a big fan, as you know. And my question is, and I think you've alluded to this in some of your work, as difficult as it is to deal with the drug policies and racism, et cetera, before the pandemic came along, it's gotten even worse since then in George Floyd. And so it's like during this pandemic, I wake up each morning and I think, wow, I didn't think it could get any worse living in America. Here we are in September 2020, and yet it's worse. And so I know for me, like self-care and keeping my sanity and not becoming too discouraged while not losing the fire is a real challenge. And I get the sense that it is for you as well. So I'm really curious to get inside your head and to ask, how do you keep your sanity? How do you keep from losing your mind when you see what is coming on? And then you see the White House with their white supremacy threats of violence. I mean, how do you stay balanced, and how do you keep from losing your mind or getting too discouraged, or we can't go to Canada anymore?
No, that's a great question, Patrick. You know, we interact a lot on Twitter, as you know, and I try to stay away from that as much as I can. But, you know,
yeah, we miss you. We need you, man.
You know, that's part of the problem that drives me crazy. So one of the things that I try to do, I try to work out as much as I can, and I write about these problems and trying to think of about. I got this new book that I just finished, and I'm working on another one, and I'm also making plans to move outside of the country. So that's exciting, leaving the USA. That's really exciting, trying to figure out where I'm gonna live. And just trying to figure out, I'm trying my best to get what I need in this land of fear, so that I can pursue my life, liberty, and happiness. You know, and so, yeah, so I try and make sure I get my head right by living up to the ideals of the country, if you feel me.
Yeah, and it's not easy, is it?
It's not easy at all, you know, so I make sure that I'm trying to advocate on those who have been shut out on the one hand. I make sure that I take care of my mental health by a variety of means, some of which I prefer not to say here, but read the new book, Drug Use for Grown-Ups. And I also exercise, you know, those are the things that I try to do. And preparing to leave the country, that helps.
Yeah, me as well. Exercise works out really well for me. Rock music, it definitely helps.
Music, absolutely. Music, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it can take me to another place, and it's a good place. Thank you,
Patrick.
The next question we have was from Maria. Maria.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Hart. I had a question from your paper about how you talk about the use of implicit bias as a word. And I've noticed this a lot in medical journals. It's like implicit bias, even the terminology, social determinants of health are very like academic white ways of saying racism without calling it racism. And I was hoping if you could like maybe elaborate a little bit more on that and how we should literally change our language to make this more of an addressed issue in academia.
Yeah, so implicit bias is one of my pet peeves. So implicit bias is this sort of game, computer game, how fast you respond to various words, and then you get an implicit bias score. That has been translated into explaining why a cop brutalized some black man. And it has nothing to do with implicit bias. It could just be racism. And so implicit bias and those kind of terms are terms that, like my profession, psychology, has come up with in order to minimize or sanitize the horrific consequences or act of brutal racism. And so implicit bias is this cognitive thing that might or may not have anything to do with racism. But we talk about it. We do we've even started implicit bias training. And it may not even have anything to do with the act. And so for me, it's maddening that we talk about implicit bias, as opposed to just calling a spade a spade. But that's what we do. We don't do that in science. In science, I mean, like in real science, in science, you have a problem, you operationalize it, and you go and you deal with it. Whereas this implicit bias thing, we remove ourselves from the problem.
Sorry. I actually had a question when I was reading through the paper. You mentioned that you were in the Air Force, during which you were a police officer for some time.
Yes.
What was that like, being on the inside of, that, given your thoughts now?
Yeah, at the time, I really didn't like it, carrying an M16, and I didn't really sign up for that, but I didn't have any money to go to college, and so it's the only way I could go to college was to go into the Air Force. But I'm glad I did it because, I carried an M16 for this country. So when people are talking about being patriots, many of them didn't even do that. And so I'm happy I did it, but I would not do that again. I don't believe in killing people and war and that sort of thing. It was quite an experience. Without the experience, I probably wouldn't be here today because it paid for my college. But you'll note none of my children went to the military, and they won't go to the military.
Did you ever end up having to deal with like a call regarding drugs, ironically?
No, never had to deal with a call dealing with drugs. My time in the military was spent overseas, on Okinawa, Japan, and in England. And we were dealing with more serious things. Like, for example, during my time, the United States, we bombed Libya, and they were going to retaliate. There were threats to retaliate, and so we were on call for this retaliation. So you were dealing with real issues. When you don't have real issues, you create issues. And that's what we did with the war on drugs. So in the United States, things were okay, didn't have any real issues, so you create these issues. Drugs are the worst things that are going on. Now that we have COVID-19 here, you don't hear so much about the war on drugs as much, but people who are making money off the war on drugs are trying to remind us about drugs are here, because we have to keep our budgets up. The same thing happened with the war on terror. When we had the war on terror, the war on drugs kind of took a back seat, but the people who were making money off the war on drugs were saying, wait, the terrorists are connected with the drugs. They're the ones who are bringing in the drugs, because there's a lot of money in fighting drugs or in this drug war. And so everybody's fighting to keep their money. But the real issue we're really concerned about in our society, and we should be, is COVID-19, not drugs. And if we house people, make sure they are housed and all of those things, we take care of those things, then we'll be okay.
Thank you.
I think that there was a question from Hannah.
Hi, I have a question around the brain disease model that often gets thrown around in, I'm in clinical psychology, and they talk often about addicts having diseased brains. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate more on the evidence that does or does not support that model.
Yeah, thank you. So the disease model of drug addiction is a model in which I came up in. So I got my PhD in 1996. I went to graduate school in 1992. Between 1990 and the year 2000, it was George Bush 1 proclaimed it the decade of the brain. And so there were fellowships and money to study neuroscience. And my PhD was paid for because of like this proclamation. It was great. We were learning about the brain, and the brain is a fascinating thing to learn about. And I was studying drugs. And so we were looking at how drugs damage the brain. So we all thought. And sure enough, if you give very large doses of a drug like, I don't know, methamphetamine to an animal, to a naive animal, and you give it to that animal for several days, and then you dissect the brain, and you can see this destruction of monoamine pathways, cells that carry dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. You can see this nice sort of destruction. You would also see sort of behavioral problems in that animal. And so those kind of findings led to hypotheses about people who meet criteria for a substance use disorder. Now, the story goes on, but we oftentimes don't tell the next part of the story. If you take those same animals, slowly escalate the amount of methamphetamine you give to those animals to reach the large sort of bolus doses that you were giving, you allow them to become tolerant, and now you give them these large doses that were toxic, you can prevent this toxicity that you saw. Tolerance is protective in this sense. That's in laboratory animals. But still, it's still important to know that large doses of amphetamines given to naive animals can cause damage, destruction to catecholamines, monoamines. That's important to know. The problem is that a number of people who study drugs and use neuroimaging claim to have found destruction in the brains of people who use amphetamines, who abuse or who meet criteria for an amphetamine use disorder. They purport to have found neural damage. One of the things that I did in a seminar here was to really look at the evidence. One semester decided to really look at the evidence. And lo and behold, the evidence did not fit the story. I use amphetamine because amphetamines are the most likely drug that you will see the toxicity. I mean, it's hard to see the toxicity with cocaine in laboratory animals, even when you give these large doses. It's hard to see the toxicity with other drugs. And so amphetamines are the ones that you're more likely to see it. So the problem is that in humans, nobody has actually demonstrated or seen this toxicity, this brain disease that is so pervasive. Well, this notion is so pervasive, but the evidence in humans is just not there. And trust me, I mean, I have looked and I continue to look. I wrote a review paper on this, looking at the evidence. And still, I'm challenging any of the scientists in that area to show me the toxicity, show me the evidence of a brain disease, and I still have not seen it. And it's really simple. I'm not convinced. Now, that's not to say that people should go out and particularly naive people go out and take large doses of drugs, because that's not good. You might not be around to tell us about what happened. That's not good. Tolerance is a good thing. That's why when we, like, for example, when you drink alcohol, you don't start off by drinking a quart of rum. You kind of work your way up. And tolerance is protective. I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you.
We also have a question from Adris. You can unmute yourself if you.
Hi, my name is Adris. I'm a sophomore at CC. Attended major is neuroscience. As someone who's interested in studying transgenerational traumas, I was wondering about the selection process of your lab participants. And if you look at their family history and the impact of the family's history on drug policing and how that affects their drug usage.
No, I haven't looked at like the family sort of effects. My work has looked mainly at the direct pharmacological effects on behavior, brain, and that sort of thing. No, I haven't. That's not really what I do. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Thank you.
We also have a question about scientific communication from Mr. Guo.
Sorry. Hi, Dr. Hart. Thank you for the talk. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thanks. So I was talking to a physics student about war on drugs and police brutality, and he actually pulled up a paper from a famous journal called Officer Characteristic and Racial Disparities in Fatal Officer-Involved Shootings, which actually concluded that there is like no anti-Black or anti-Hispanic disparities across police shootings. And like he was like pulling out that paper, and I was arguing that this paper is not controlling variables, and you can't just reduce people into data points because you don't know what actually happened during these events, and you have to look at causes. It's just like the paper has a lot of like things that are not like, you know, super conclusive about this conclusion. And he was saying that, okay, so then the conclusion is that this, like, you can't just, that means that everything is inconclusive and complicated. You can just conclude that like shooting supports systematic racism, and you need data points to like support a theory. And you can just look at like single events reported by media and say that there's systematic racism. So I feel like there's like a huge measurability for a talk. You know, I just don't know how to like talk to him through scientific communication. Do you have any advice on that?
So one of the principles I try to live by is that I try not to engage in conversation with people who don't abide by the rules of evidence, because I'm getting older and I'm trying to enjoy my life. And, like having a conversation with the President of the United States would be a waste of my time. And I wouldn't do it. And so you have to decide whether or not this is going to make a difference. And you have to weigh the sort of cost benefit ratio. Are the costs more than the potential benefits? If the costs are, you probably shouldn't be in that conversation. It's just like with COVID-19, we know that wearing masks are really helpful at decreasing these rates. But yet we have a number of our fellow citizens who refuse to do so. It wouldn't do me any good to engage in conversation with those people. None. So you have to take care of yourself too, because Patrick raised the issue about self-care. That's part of the self-care. So I don't do it.
Thanks.
So that's all the time we have allotted. Dr. Hart, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. And I'd like to thank our audience for attending our talk as well. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please follow us on Instagram and Twitter, which will be posted in the chat. And subscribe to our mailing list for updates on future events. We'll be sending out the details on our October event shortly. We will also include a quick survey.
I'm sorry, I was going to say something. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, of course. We'll also include a quick survey as we'd appreciate your feedback. Thank you again.
I'd just like to thank you all for coming and joining us today. I see Maya Tolstoy is here. She didn't say anything. Some of you all may know Maya. She was the acting vice president for arts and sciences. If you all are on campus, or when you're on campus, if Maya is back, please get to know her. She is a warrior. She's one of those people who actually, who has been fighting for justice for a long time. And we would have really been well off if she was our vice president at the university. But I just want you all to be aware of her.
Oh, thank you so much for such kind words. You are one of my heroes. So it's been such a pleasure and an honor to learn from you today. And I was going to write you an email afterwards. You so struck a chord in my heart when you talked about the need to have integrity, and you have so much integrity. And thank you so much. And I hope to catch up with you.
We will, Maya. And thank you guys. It's good to see you, Maya. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hart.